Chapter 384 of My Hero Academia, titled It's a Small World, kicks off with the mighty Gigantomachia releasing a deep guttural cry as he rushes forward with yet another mountain-sized landmass in his clutches. Protecting this big behemoth was Mount Lady with a brand new huge support item. Mount Lady is unironically one of my favorite characters in the series. In the beginning, she seems to be just another influencer riding a trend, in this case being a hero. But at this point, we've seen her get down and dirtier than most others. Just being a hero at all these days is impressive enough. A flying Tokoyami with hawks on his back would point out how risky this plan to have Shinso brainwash Gigantomachia really is. But despite the risk, Hawks and the others figured it was worth betting on. All for One, who at this point has been turned into a teenager, would resist his attempt to take him down. Thinking to himself, All for One wasn't sure how Aoyama's family was able to trick him until now. The answer was Shinso and his quirk brainwashing. Now here's where things get a little silly. Here we see Hawks for some reason is absolutely flabbergasted. He knows that Shinso's brainwashing will wear off if Machia gets hit hard enough. All for One would admit that manipulating others with the power of quirks is exactly what a villain like him would do. And would you believe it? All for One's first and only attempt to hit the big guy would easily land. He blasted straight past Mount Lady like she was nothing. Now smoldering from the attack, Gigantomachia, whose eyes were currently shielded by the visor from his mole quirk, would confirm the identity of his master by way of smell. He'd strongly express how he'd been waiting for All for One's return as two truck-sized tears would fall from his covered eyes. Despairingly, Machia would ask his master, "Why did you abandon me?" This caught All for One off guard. Obviously, he doesn't have the time to be this rock monster's therapist. Hawks didn't expect this either, wondering if Shinso is forcing Machia to speak. But that's not possible since he hasn't had a chance to redo the brainwashing. With a brief flashback, we see All for One, built like a Roblox character, talking to the Shaquille O'Neal of the furry community that is Gigantomachia. The Demon Lord, in a very sweet tone, would explain to Machia that he needs to go into hiding. But in due time, his successor, Shigaraki, would come looking for him. The memory of All for One's words that leaving Machia broke his heart to pieces made the Goliath sob tears big enough to drown an elephant. Defiantly, he'd yelled that although Shigaraki's body was different, he still had All for One's smell and voice. Which, I'm not sure I understand the issue here. Machia would continue on that he trusted All for One's words and waited a very long time. But despite this, he was abandoned. All for One never came back. Meanwhile, Kirishima was smoldering too after having protected himself and Shinso from the hellish onslaught of All for One. An impressive defensive feat for sure. Shinso would then confirm that Gigantomachia is now the only person besides Deku who's managed to resist his brainwashing. This is impressive too, but considering Machia can handle as many quirks as he does, despite never having his body be modified, it shouldn't be too unbelievable. Shinso would also reveal that even when he was controlling Machia, the Titan never stopped crying and muttering about being betrayed. So although his hold wasn't that strong, Shinso was willing to go through with the plan by betting on Machia's anger. At this point, he's just a safety precaution. All for One's glare would be strong. A trembling Shinso would mention how plenty of people say that he acts like a villain, but in reality, his quirk has no control over what goes on in someone's heart at all. And seeing that even Gigantomachia turned against him, Hawks would pretty much tell All for One that nobody likes him, as our three legendary giants would rush toward the fiend, hoping to somehow keep him busy enough for Ares' power to work its magic and turn him into nothing. Gigantomachia would go from a loyal dog to a filthy rat as they all unleash their vicious attacks. Shifting scenes, we'd have a news helicopter hovering over the city as the occupants spoke about having their most expensive camera for its long-range zoom. The camera person would question if their coworker has lost their mind. After all, flying in a historic storm that's even being felt in the United States is pretty crazy. But she turned this question back around before admitting that it's just something they have to do as a reporter. And I feel like only the most hardcore My Hero Academia fans will be able to recognize her, so let me know. And while you think on that, she'd think back to her coworker showing her something. In the present, she'd mentioned how Rogue Deku was actually a UA student all along. With the visuals of Gentle's livestream, she thought he looked familiar, and went through some of her old footage. And that's when she remembered meeting him briefly at the sports festival. Did you remember? Back then, Deku was really timid, so to see his transformation in just a year's time was a major shock that even brought her to tears. Everyone's actions are having a ripple effect. The actions of the reformed villain, Gentle Criminal, have begun to change the world, which is even crazier by the end of this chapter. We then get a closer look at Gentle's dream, which would be followed by this epic shot of Deku furiously gripping Shigaraki's hands, which would be followed up by a maniacal shot of Shigaraki looking like the Joker, clearly enjoying their battle for supremacy. But listen, for as insane as going out into a storm like this might be, these guys weren't the only ones who felt the journalistic call to action. Yet another reporter from the past will return to the story as she solemnly apologized for placing her coworker in harm's way like this. But this heteromorphic cameraman had no complaints since he made the decision himself. As a refresher, this lady first appeared during the press conference to follow the end of the First War. Back then, she scolded Endeavor and the heroes for their failure, doing so especially because her mother was severely injured during Gigantomachia's rampage. In the present, she'd say that this went beyond journalism for her, that she felt the need to undo the damage she caused. This was personal, not professional. Now obviously she didn't help the situation back then, but I don't think anyone would say she actually caused much damage. But maybe you disagree here. Either way, her partner would express a similar sentiment, that they owe this to themselves. Which this woman knew was the same for everyone fighting, that this isn't like when All Might fought All for One. Deku isn't alone in this battle. Despite seeing many of their peers quit being a hero after the First War, some have decided to continue fighting. And no hate, but this panel's kind of funny to me. And that's because as examples of the heroes that have quit, we have a bunch of silhouettes instead of actual characters. The three characters that we do recognize are all super lame and have never actually been relevant. Yoroi Musha was a number 9 hero, but we've never seen him do anything. We don't even know what his quirk is. He's more design than character. Death Arms was one of Mount Lady's friends, but he's just a reoccurring background character that hasn't done anything important. And lastly, if you recognize this guy, you are definitely in the top 1% of My Hero Academia fans because he doesn't even have a name. At the end of the First War, Uraka saw this random guy quit. We are really scraping the bottom of the barrel here. Plenty of countries have reported that Japan's done for, but there are still many who haven't given up hope and continue to fight. That's the story they're here to tell, even if it kills them, regardless of the weather, win or lose. They believe that every day the world becomes smaller and more connected, which is why recording what happens here is so important. And just like that, we see Gentle's viewership skyrocket from close to 8K all the way up to more than 20K. This story needs to be shown to their small world, as watching the stream on a tablet will be two young boys. One of them would wonder where Japan even is, and the other would recognize it to be All Might's country. And these boys were far from the only ones watching closely. Now there is a lot to take in here that I don't want you guys to miss. We have civilians who lost their homes in the First War. We have the number 1 Egyptian hero, Salam, from the 3rd movie. 2 kids are looking back towards 2 adults that are watching the stream. There's not much to go off here, but these adults might just be All for One civilian sleeper agents that we saw back at UA when Deku returned. Best believe that they will play a role in due time. We'd have Star and Stripe's former friend, Commander Agpar, watching. Even the Commander-in-Chief, the President of the United States, was watching too, which could mean that some assistance could be on the way at some point. Besides some regular civilians, we see Death Arms again, watching as all his former colleagues fought for their lives and the lives of others. And I gotta say, it must be really hard to press the subscribe button when your fingers are that big. So if you haven't already, I'm gonna just assume that you have hands like his. We see Elect Plant and another hero listening to the communications devices in front of Big Ben. This guy was there for the 1st and 3rd My Hero Academia movies, but fun fact, like All Might, Elect Plant was only in America temporarily. He actually operates in England. Then there's the Shimano siblings from the 2nd movie. We've got some random old people, Melissa Shield from movie 1, and some guy with a cat. Deku's efforts won't be all these people see. The combined efforts of Japan's heroes will be sure to make them all the world's greatest heroes. But let me know which of these cameos you like the most. As always, I'm Slice of Otaku. Thank you all so much for watching and have an awesome day. I love you.